Hello everyone, welcome to Literary Spaces. Today we will discuss the first unit of the GE paper, Basics of Social Psychology. The unit is called Introduction to Social Psychology. As it is mentioned in the syllabus, we have to cover the nature, scope, history, methods of research, social psychology in India and current trends. Now we will look into each of this topic in detail and I will leave the timestamps in the description of the video. So if you need to skip to any particular topic, you can use that. Now first let's start with what is social psychology and what is its nature. Social psychology is the study of how people affect and are affected by others. Human beings always operate in a society. Our society influences every aspect of our life, and social psychology examines how people think, feel, and act within a social framework. Social psychology is scientific in nature. It relies on scientific, systematic observation, experimentation, and analysis to understand human beings and their society. Next, we have the scope of social psychology. How we can use social psychology in other aspects of our life. Human beings are very social animals and society influences every aspect of our life. Hence, social psychology has a very vast scope. It collaborates with numerous other fields like economics. It is the study of production, distribution and consumption of goods and services. We all know what economics is, but how is it related to social psychology? Social psychology are very interested in these topics. It helps us understand how individuals depend upon each other in such a large society and how this large society functions. Next, we have sociology. Sociology is the study of human societies. It is very closely linked to social psychology, and many people make the mistake to think that they are the same thing, but they differ in what they focus on. Psychologists tend to focus on an individual and their brain process in a scientific way, while sociologists look into larger units like countries, religion, organization in a more philosophical and ideological way. But sociology and social psychology have very same ideas, and we can use both of them to expand our understanding of human beings. Next, we have anthropology. It is the study of human culture. Human culture consists of the shared values, beliefs, and practices of a group of people, and these practices and values are passed down from one generation to another. It is a very important topic in social psychology. Our culture highly influences our behavior in a society. Next, we have history. It is the study of past events. For humans to progress, they should understand their past. Social psychologists have to use historical context to examine various problems. Next, we have political science. It is the study of political organizations, especially the government. Social psychologists conduct research on political behaviors and issues like election, parties, different views, and etc. Psychologists are also very interested in political leaders and how they have such a massive influence. And lastly, we need to see psychology. Social psychology holds a very special place within the field of psychology as well. Psychology has to be differentiated into various branches, and social psychology collaborates with each of these branches like clinical psychology, cognitive psychology, and etc. The understanding of our society highly influences all of our aspects. The next topic that we have to see is the history of social psychology. The foundation of social psychology can be found in ancient thinkers and philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, Chanakya, and etc. It is their theories and ideologies that started to evolve and take up a scientific approach, and it has become the modern field of social psychology that we know now. Next, we need to know when social psychology started to emerge as a new discipline. This started to happen in 18th century during the Age of Reason. This era was marked by a growing focus on logic and reason and rationality to examine the human nature. During this time, some of the first textbooks were also published in social psychology by authors like McDougall, Ross, etc. Next, we need to see the influence of Second World War. During this time, social psychologists started to grow an interest in group morale, obedience, persuasion, and propaganda. The later years were marked by this growing focus on social problems like gender and racial prejudice, social stigma, etc. During this time, some of the most important experiments happened in the field of social psychology, like Levin's work on group dynamics, Festinger's theories on social comparison and cognitive dissonance, Ash's conformity studies, and Milgram's obedience experiment. These experiments and ideas became foundational to the modern social psychology that we know now. Then came the crisis in social psychology. In the 1960s and 1970s, social psychology faced a crisis of confidence, questioning its methods, ethics, and relevance to social change. The crisis arose from three main issues: ethical concern, methodological flaws, and ideological biases. Experiments like Zimbardo's prison simulation and Milgram's obedience study raised serious questions about the harms caused to the participant during an experiment. Many researchers also highlighted that because the participants are aware that they are in an experiment, the result is always biased and it does not reflect the natural human setting. Many critics also raised doubt about how social psychology can reflect specific ideologies, raising concerns about its neutrality. Next, we have the modern social psychology. In the modern era, research in social psychology is heavily regulated by ethical standards to ensure that studies are conducted responsibly and with the respect for participants' rights. Biology and technology has also started to play a very huge role in shaping this field, with advances like evolutionary psychology and social neuroscience. The field has also adopted a pluralistic and multicultural perspective. This means that it is more open-minded and can address the diversity in our world today. Social psychology in the modern era is also focused on the applied and practical aspect of the field. And that was the history of social psychology and how it has evolved over the years. Next, we will see the method of study in social psychology. To answer a problem in social psychology, a scientific method is used by all researchers. This involves the following steps. Step 1 is always stating the problem. The process always begins with identifying a specific problem or a question that needs to be explored and explained. This is a kind of a hunch. For example, we can have a question that does playing video games increase aggressive behavior? Our next step in answering this question would be to formulate a hypothesis. Based on our problem and question, a hypothesis is formed. A hypothesis is a testable prediction or a tentative solution. It is formed through the existing knowledge of the researcher, but it has not been proved yet. So we don't know if this hypothesis, if the solution is right or wrong. For example, a hypothesis for our previous question would be that playing violent video games increases aggression. Now we need to see if this hypothesis is correct or not. And for doing that, we need to go to the step 3, that is designing and conducting the study or the research. So in the next step, the researcher plans a study and research method. Then it tests the hypothesis. If the hypothesis is wrong, we have to modify it and try it again. If it is successful, then it means that your theory stands corrected. The fourth step is reporting the result. Once the hypothesis is successfully proven, the researcher has to share their findings with the scientific community. This is done through publication in scientific journals. This allows other researchers to study the problem. Next, we will see the methods of research. This is a deep dive into step 3. That is designing and conducting the study. How do we test our hypothesis? It has various methods. First, we have experimental studies. This means to have an experiment according to our hypothesis. The definition of experiment studies is to find a cause and effect relationship by manipulating one variable to examine whether another variable is being affected. This is a very complex definition, so let's understand it through an example. Let's go to the example that we saw in our last topic, that is playing video games can increase aggression. So here, video games and aggressions are two different variables. We need to see if these two variables are connected or not. If we manipulate the first variable, that is video games, if we let a participant play too many video games for a longer period of time, there is a chance that the second variable, aggression, will occur or it will increase. This proves that our hypothesis is correct and also develops a cause and effect relationship between the two. Now, experimental studies can also be divided into two types, that is laboratory experiments and field experiments. Laboratory experiments are experiments done in the lab. They are commonly used in psychology studies because we have more control over our variables. But it has a drawback, and that is because it is done in a lab, we don't know if its application will be the same in real life. The second is field experiments. Sometimes researchers opt to do their experiment in the field in a more natural setting. It gives us a real life insight. But it has a drawback, and that is it is more difficult for us to control the variables. So we can't be sure if our two variables actually have a cause and effect relationship. Because it is done in a natural setting, there is a chance that there might be another variable affecting these two variables. There are also ways to find answer to our question in social psychology by using non-experimental methods. For example, there is the correlational studies. This includes just observing two naturally occurring variables to see if they have a cause and effect relationship. We don't need to do an experiment here. But we can observe someone we know who plays a lot of video games. We need to study their behavior carefully to see if playing video games and aggression are directly connected. There is also the method of survey research. This involves gathering data as evidence to prove that two variables have a cause and effect relationship. Here also, we don't need to do an experiment. We just need to look for instances in our society where we see that there is a connection between playing video games and aggression, and collect all this data to prove that actually they do have a cause and effect relationship. Our next topic is social psychology in India. To understand how social psychology is studied in India, we need to examine the unique Indian perspective of social psychology. Let's see why it is unique. Social psychology always has this common quest to understand and transform human behavior. But the approach to do that varies across different cultures. The way social psychology is studied in West is totally different from how it is studied in India, because they are two very different cultures. So when examining social psychology in the Indian context, we need to consider its unique culture, social and historical factors. Let's see these factors. First, in India, there is the emphasis on collectivism. Indian society places a strong emphasis on group harmony, interdependence, and maintaining social relationship. When we compare this to the West, they are more individualistic. Collectivist nature of Indians highly influences our social behavior, such as decision making, conformity, and intergroup relation. So this is something that we need to keep in mind when we study social psychology. Then there is our cultural values and norms. India is a diverse country with multiple religion, language, and traditions. And these cultural values is embedded in our head. It highly shapes our social behavior and attitude. Indian social psychologists have to carefully see how this culture impacts our society. Next, we have caste system. Caste system is something that is very unique to India. It influences social hierarchies, intergroup relation, and social identity. And that's why it is another factor that social psychologists have to be careful about. Next, we have religion. Religion also plays a significant role in our society. For a country like India, which houses numerous religions, it is important for social psychologists to study them very carefully. Lastly, we have globalization. There is rapid socio-economic changes and globalization happening in India that is influencing social psychology. Urbanization, modernization, and exposure to Western culture has led to a shift in our attitude, our values, and our behaviors. And that has become a new challenge and opportunity for social psychologists to study the Indian context. Next, we will see some major historical developments in Indian social psychology. It was in Calcutta University that the first psychology department was established. Here, N. Sengupta became the first chairman of the department. Though his specialty was in experimental psychology, he was deeply interested in the study of Indian society. This book was published in London and was widely noticed by the academic community. And this was our first step towards social psychology. Next, social psychology started to emerge as a new discipline in India. Even though Sengupta and Mukherjee set a very strong example, collaboration between sociology and psychology started to become rarer. Indian social psychologists, inspired by the Western psychologists, started to put all their effort into establishing a unique identity of psychology as a different discipline. So it started to move away from sociology. Some of the first social psychology experiments that happened in India was Jamuna Prasad's study of the Bihar earthquake in 1934 and Durganand Sinha's work on similar lines. These experiments and study highly influenced psychologists from other countries as well. Next, we will see how this field grows into popularity in India. In the later years, social psychologists started to work into areas of prejudice, stereotypes, and social attitudes inspired by Western psychologists. But they started to look into these topics through the Indian perspective. A lot of large-scale surveys were conducted, especially Adinarayan's study on racial and communal attitudes and caste attitudes. Data shows that there were a lot of surveys and studies conducted from time to time during these years that shows that social psychology was growing in popularity in India. Now let's see the modern Indian social psychology. In modern times, Indian social psychology has started to explore various topics like ethnic identities, rise of depressed class, and more. The approach of social psychology is a mix of Western and Indian ideas. Indian social psychologists are also very interested in using scientific and technological method to study the unique society of India. We will move on to our last topic, and that is current trends in social psychology. Social psychology is not a static science. It is continuously evolving to keep pace with the changes in our society. Here are some of the major trends in modern social psychology. First is cognition and behavior. In the past, social psychologists were divided into two distinct groups. Those who were primarily interested in social behaviors and how people act in situations. And then there were the ones who were interested in social cognition and the mental processes that took place inside the human brain. This division has now totally disappeared. In modern social psychology, behavior and cognition are very closely linked. There is a universal agreement that we need to examine the exterior as well as the interior aspects of human being. Then there is the social psychology application. In recent years, social psychology has expanded their focus on practical application. This application happens in various areas of our life, such as health, population psychology, environmental psychology, and even the legal system. Today's social psychology is not only concerned with theoretical concepts, but also with addressing real-world issues. In modern times, social psychology also has a multicultural perspective. In the past, social psychology has been criticized for being too American-centered. Most of the studies were conducted in US, and this really affected the study of social psychology in other cultures. Like we saw how Western ideas influenced Indian social psychology. In the modern times, there's a shift in this field. Researchers have started to recognize the importance of culture in shaping social behavior. Now there is an increasing focus on understanding cultural differences and their impact on our behavior. And that is why modern social psychology has a multicultural perspective that is essential for making social psychology more inclusive and relevant to global context. In modern times, social psychology is also highly impacted by neuroscience, biology, and evolutionary sciences. Science and technology has highly affected social psychology. There is a growing recognition that biological and evolutionary factors play a significant role in shaping our society. Hence, in modern times, social psychology has integrated all of these fields to have a more comprehensive understanding of human behavior. Lastly, we have the concept of ethical values. In the modern times, there is an increasing focus on ethical values and consideration in research. Historically, social psychology has been criticized for conducting experiments that sometimes lack ethical guidelines. For example, there are controversial studies like Stanley Milgram's obedience experiment and Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment. These have raised significant concerns about the physical and psychological harm that is inflicted on participants during the experiment. In modern times, ethical standards have evolved in social psychology, and researchers have to follow these ethical guidelines to prioritize respect, fairness, and transparency. And these were all of the topics in your first unit. Stay tuned for the next units, and thanks for watching.